Alrighty, last of the props are in place. Everything is set, ready. Welcome back to the show, everybody. And I am going to throw a different spin on the intros, probably from here on out. If you're new here, I'm Squatch. This is the 1936 Caterpillar RD-6, and we are trying to restore it. So if this is your first time watching, I think we're on episode 19 of the series here. Go check out the playlist that I've compiled on the channel here for this project. Everything is arranged from the very start to the most recent. That's the easiest way to get completely caught up on everything that's happened up to this point. And every project on the channel has its own playlist. Very convenient tool. So, task at hand. This is where we start taking gears out of the tub. And this is also the point where you would normally check your setup of your pinion gear down there to the bevel gear right here. These are called bevel gears and not ring gears because there's not a differential inside. They're on a solid shaft. That's your difference. So you'd start with a dial indicator. I've got it on a tooth. You would want to check backlash, make note of it, and then get your marking compound, transfer compound, and brush that on a few gear teeth, roll it through a good mesh cycle, check your contact, your actual contact pattern, and well, we don't have to do that on this one because this gear set is beyond worn out. Anytime you see the metal actually starting to mushroom off of the edge of the tooth, like you see here, or the visible wear that's on every one of them, even on the reverse side, they're spalling. This gear set is completely worn out, so we have no setup here to replicate again. We don't have to do any checks, any documentation. Those gears are scrap metal at this point, so we can just take right apart. So, lucky us, right? Let's get into it. All right, we've got some big fold-over locks for you in here. So, first step, whether you are trying to remove transmission gears or bevel gear with cross shaft, the first thing you want to do is unmesh the bevel gear as far as possible from the pinion. That's going to make everything much easier from here on out. So to do that, we have 6 fold-over locks we have to flatten. There's a small one here on this little lock tab, another small one here on this piece, which is an oil catch. It just basically catches oil that's coming off of that bevel gear. It also acts as a lock for that large nut. And then we have the bearing cap bolts, 4 of them, each one with a heavy duty lock beneath it. So I'm just finishing up the heavy ones right now. Okay, bolt with small fold over lock holds flat, thick lock. That lock holds this spanner type nut from turning. All right, and there's one here and there's another one over here on the other side of the bevel gear. You twist those in tandem to shift that whole gear and cross shaft side to side, and that's how you adjust backlash and contact pattern and things like that. So there's our bolt for the other side, and like I said, this is like an oil catch. Oh, and it's stuck. There we are. Acts as a lock, as well as catches all that oil that's slinging off the bevel gear and just prevents it from just hitting the back wall of the case quite so much. Now we just loosen the 4 bearing cap bolts. 1 1/8 fits these. I don't know if you heard the turkeys gobbling at me. They don't like the sound of the impact. With the pressure off the bearing caps now, we can begin drifting this bevel gear away from the pinion. And to do that, you turn on these 2 spanner type nuts. Now this is where people usually just break out the big hammer and the chisel or the punch, and they just start hitting them. That will work, but it really beats them up. To do it properly, you want to have the correct spanner wrench. To the rolling red toolbox, I want to highlight this Caterpillar Service Tools Manual. In my experience, the literature side of the antique Caterpillar hobby has probably been the most overlooked, and it's probably the most important component. And books like this have been especially handy for tractors like this RD-6 that did not have a manual specifically written for it. But here is the spanner wrench that we need. So we've got two different jaws, a handle, and it says, here's a spanner wrench that can be adjusted to fit all the different sizes of spanner nuts used on Caterpillar equipment. The 11 holes in the jaw and the 2 holes in the handle give 22 different adjustments. By reversing the handle, an additional 22 adjustments can be obtained. 2 jaws have been provided for this wrench. One is 3/4 of an inch in thickness for the heavier operations, and the other is 3/8 of an inch thick to permit it to be used for bevel gear adjustments where space is limited. The wrench is designed to withstand 900 foot-pounds torque. The handle is of round construction to permit the use of a cheater pipe where additional leverage is required. And lucky for us, OTC still makes the spanner wrench. I purchased this brand new about 2 weeks ago. I got it through McMaster Car Company because that was the only outlet I found where I could get both thickness jaws and the handle in one kit. McMaster Car number for this is on the bottom of the screen right now. But it's all here. This is the thicker 3/4 jaw, 11 holes. I've got the thinner 3/8 jaw loaded in. It's got the 11 holes. That'll fit down next to that bevel gear. A round handle with 2 holes, reversible. And I have had a cheater pipe on this, working on an old stovepipe already. Very quality wrench. Highly recommend investing in one of these because you'll need it here, you'll need it down there, you'll need it under here. You'll be using it quite a lot. You want to start with the nut that is next to the bevel gear and run that as tight into the bevel gear as you can get it. Okay, pretty good gap opened up right there. Now we turn on the nut that is opposite the gear and go in the same direction. All right, this one's a bit tighter. There we go. There, we got it moving. That's where this wrench really comes in handy. What this does, there we are, hook it, come on. What this does is it forces both of the bearing cages, okay, the one right here and the other one right here, that way. And that's what carries the cross shaft and the bevel gear away from the pinion. These cages are pinned like with locating dowels to these caps, so the cage doesn't spin, but the nut spins on the cage and forces it in one direction or the other. And after a couple minutes of turning, I think we are about far enough. Judging by how much bare metal opened up on the other side of that grease, that's how far we've shifted it that way. And yeah, nice wide backlash. That gives us the working room we need to start unmeshing gears. So we'll begin on the transmission. Now, these early RD6s have a rather unique shift pattern. This fork right here, back is reverse, and then ahead is second, and that's neutral. The other one now, back is first gear, and then we'll click it back to neutral. And now this is where it's interesting. The first click ahead is fourth gear, and you have to go through fourth then to get to third. So the second click ahead, that's third. And the reason why I had to work a little bit right there, it really compresses the spring that's on this guide rod to get to third. Okay, so there's fourth, and now we're back to neutral. So I think the spring is here to actually help you find fourth gear a little bit easier, because that's the first click and you're just starting to compress that spring and you're just starting to feel a little resistance on the shifter. You know it's ready to drop into fourth. But then third, you pop that detent with the shifter and it is quite a push and a long travel to get all the way up to third, and you've just about completely compressed that spring. So I think that's why that's there, and that's how they managed two gears pretty much on one throw. So we're back to pop and fold over locks. We've got 5 total to do, and we finally found one nice one. So yeah, we've got 1, 2, right there and right there. 3, 4. I just finished with 4, and look at that. The first proper fold over lock I've found on this whole tractor. It's almost a shame to flatten them back out, but we're gonna have to do it anyway. So we pull the bolts out of the shift rail guides. Then I'll put this shift fork in first gear position. It gets the fork as far off of that guide rod as possible. And if everything lines in right, yep, we can just drift it all back enough to get it off of the rod. And then both forks and rails will pull straight out. Next is the guide rod and the spring. This is the front of the rod right here, and that nut acts as a jam nut holding it in position. So we'll take that off. Peel the lock washer off as well. Now you just take the spring, slide it down the rod, and you see that flat right there. There's another one on the other side. Those are there so that you can grab onto that with a wrench. And we have to unthread it so that it goes into the transmission gear compartment. That's how you take it out. And there we have it. Now that we can see inside the transmission a lot better, I want to direct your attention to this gear that's all by itself down in the bottom. You see them spinning around, okay? And you see how it's on a bracket that kind of floats and he clicks and drifts back and forth. I call him the gear to nowhere because his sole task is to pick up oil and throw it around. So that one's spinning whenever the transmission is in gear. It's on this floating bracket. The bracket has a bushing on the inside where it just lets this bottom shaft spin inside of it. But that side-to-side click and that float, that's because there are 2 bumps in the bottom of the transmission case that cage that bracket in. You can see them really well on stovepipe here, right there and right there. So that's that clicking and that drifting that you're hearing when I move that backlash. And I wanted to point that out because Cat was especially proud of it. They even pointed out as a selling point in some of the RD-6 literature that I have. So we're going to have to pay special attention to the position of this bracket when we go to slide this whole gear set out the front of the case. So the next step is we have these 10 nuts around the perimeter of this front cover. We need to take all those off. Now we're ready to pull the front cover with both shafts and the entire gear set out the front of the main case here. But I want to show you something. I ran into some trouble on old stovepipe diesel 40 trying to do this. This part of the front cover, all right, this is all one housing right here, holds the reverse idler gear. On the diesel 40, this part of it, it's like it's stuck out farther than what it appears to on this RD-6. So different cover, different housing, I don't know. But I ran into trouble because I could only get the front cover here probably out about that far before this edge of the housing starts hitting the opening, and the whole thing bound up. I couldn't get it any farther forward. So what I had to do is remove all of the perimeter studs, okay, for the front cover, and I had to drive this alignment dowel into the case so that I could actually drop it a little bit. We left this one alone, but that allowed me to shift the whole thing off to the side, and then I was able to pull it out. You can even see where it was contacting really hard right there and right there. So is that just something that's particular to a diesel 40 and they remedied it by the time we got to the RD-6? I don't know. Looking at this one, it looks like it should pass clean out and I should be able to leave the studs in and just drift everything right off the front. We'll see what happens. Now, depending on how stuck your front cover is, how good the old gasket is, you may need to bump the back side of this cover with a wood block in order to get it to start to move. This one, yeah. Fortunately, we didn't have a gasket that was doing much anymore, so it loosened up very well. And looks like we still have clearance on this housing in here. We can get this forward a little ways by hand, and then it gets too heavy. We have to sling it after that. And when you're about that far out with the cover, maybe that far, not quite off the studs yet, you need to rotate the oil slinger gear and bracket up, there we are, and off of those bumps that are in the bottom of the case. Otherwise, the gear is going to start catching on those. There. And now that's as far as we go by hand. Take it back. Lifting Mr. Oil Slinger gear. Pull up. You really have to babysit him on the way out. There, we got him clear. Lift a little bit. Hit. All right, stop. I'll have you set down. Okay. We'll leapfrog this strap to the other side of the case opening, and then we'll be good to go. Down a little bit. All right. Okay, do a lift. All right. Lift. There, you got it. And there's the whole gear set. Interesting thing, sealed bearings on the back end. That means they've been replaced at least once. Huh. Yeah, we'll take it all apart later. All right, bevel gear, cross shaft, and steering clutches are up next. We have enough time to pull all those out today too. First, we have to deal with the brake bands, all right? And step number one is to begin removing the adjuster rods. So these rods go down into this front kind of bracket that's on the band, and there is a spring down below that. The spring keeps this bracket against the end of the adjuster rod. There's a square drive on the end, and when you start threading these, you'll see as it turns, it opens up a gap right there. And then we give it about another quarter turn, and then that gap goes away. That's because there's like a cam type profile on the end of this rod. So once that spring drops that cam back into that pocket, it holds it from turning. So it acts sort of as a detent. But what we're going to have to do is thread them all the way out. There's our adjuster rod. And we'll rescue the spring out of there. And we'll do the same for the other side. And now that we have our bands loose, we need to split them at this splice down here. And that's what these two covers are for on the back of the rear case. If you still had the top cover on, you could remove these and then reach in here and take these brake bands apart, all right, if you really had to. It's not a fun job and difficult to see, difficult to reach, but that's what those are for. So we've got 6 bolts with 6 nuts on each splice. And after all 12 bolts are out, you will be reminded why you choose black sweatshirts to work on these. The upper half of each band can be removed. And now we remove the bearing caps that we loosened at the very beginning of this episode. I think you can tell by the water droplets. We've been working in the rain, I gotta have to get this episode done. All this stuff is too grimy to care much about. Raindrops anyhow, so. There we are. And here is, right off the end of my thumb, that dowel that I mentioned that aligns with a groove. There's one for each bearing cap. Bearing cage. That's what keeps the cages from turning when you turn on these spanner nuts. All right, it just forces them side to side. Okay, hold. Pick a little bit. Come forward. Okay, up. All right, there is the cross shaft with clutches, bevel gear, in all of its greasy glory. And the main portion of the tub. Oh, old nesting material down there. Ugh. You hear that? That brake band was stuck to the bottom. Just the goo in here. Wow. I've never seen one that dirty. Now I know we had some play in our final drive pinions that transfers into this flange. Look at this. See that nut? Oh man, the press fits aren't even tight on the flanges. Look at how far that fold over lock wore into that flange face from the constant working back and forth. So that's press fit wear. That's bearing wear. Let's see about this side. Oh, this side's loose too. Look at that. Oh, look how far that drifts in and out. Well, we can probably assume these final drive pinions are both shot because the press tapers are too worn. These flanges are probably both shot. We won't have to do any puller work on those. They're already primed for disassembly. Yeah, that's why you have to press these back together. If you don't, that's what ends up happening. So we'll just set these bearing caps back in their original spots. That way we won't get anything mixed up. So, all right, that's as far as we go on disassembly today. All right, it's quite a bit emptier than it was when we started, and this is what I've been doing. You go through a lot of rags when you're working on things that are this black, and when they get to this point, well, then I use them to start dredging all the settle out from the low points. So, well, we're at the point we need to get the rest of old stovepipe off of our tub stand because this tub is ready to go up on the stand before we take track frames off and then start getting into all the rest of it. But that means next episode we'll be building a pulling adapter for this hub and then for whatever else we find from there on out. And old Frosty buddy, oh, I hope everything in your back end is good because I think we're gonna need it. Even old stovepipe still had tight flanges. Yeah, it's shocking how loose everything was in the back end of the narrow RD-6. Of course, like I say, when you work on these yourself, you have to have the equipment to press apart and press back together on reassembly. That is key. So I hope you all enjoyed this episode. We'll be in the shop next time for the next one, making chips and drilling holes and milling and machining and all of that good stuff. And then we'll see if we can bring it all out here, make something go bang. I hope to see you all back for that one. Thanks again, everybody.